Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to the next North Central Climate Collaborative webinar. We have some logistics to get through before I introduce the speaker today. This meeting is being recorded and will be posted to the North Central Climate Collaborative website within about a week of this presentation. This is an extension meeting, so I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that the snacks and restrooms are where you last left them. This is Zoom. We will have a brief poll upon conclusion of Josh's presentation. Only 2 questions, so I want to recognize that that will exist at the appropriate time, and we encourage everyone to fill that out if you don't mind. With us today to give his presentation is Josh Bendorf with the USDA Midwest Climate Hub. And I would appreciate, Josh, if you would give a little bit more introduction than my brief spiel. And please begin whenever you're ready.
All right, thanks, Hans, and thanks everyone for tuning in today. It's a privilege to get to present here today as on the NC3 webinar. I'm going to apologize in advance. I'm dealing with a little bit of a cold, so if I have to go on mute real quick to get a quick drink of water, clear my throat, just bear with me. We'll get through this. But like Hans said, I'm Josh Bendorf. I work as an ag climatologist and ORISE Fellow with the USDA's Midwest Climate Hub. My background is in meteorology and agronomy. My bachelor's degree is from UW-Madison, master's from Iowa State, and I have been with the Climate Hub for just over a year now. And during my time with the Hub, the main project that I have got to be a part of is creating these guides for navigating agricultural climate impacts in your state. Midwest Climate Hub covers 8 states, and we are putting together one of these guides for each of the states that we cover. So our agenda for this presentation today, first I'm just gonna go over a quick background of the USDA Climate Hubs for those of you who aren't familiar with the hubs, what they're about and the structure. And then a quick background of how these state assessment bulletins came about, the idea and how they have been formulated. Secondly, we'll go over the goals of these state bulletins, the format that they're in, and the partners who were involved in the creation of these documents. Thirdly, some key takeaways from the bulletins, some commonalities between the bulletins, things that were discussed in them. And then lastly, current bulletin status and plans for upcoming work. And as a quick teaser, there's an update as of today as to bulletin status. So I'll reveal that when we get to it. So what are the climate hubs? Here is a map of the USDA climate hubs and the areas that they cover. Here in the Midwest, we're covered by the Midwest Climate Hub, which is based at Ames, Iowa, which I am a part of, and as well as the Northern Forest Hub, which covers issues of climate and forestry, both in the Midwest and the Northeast. So what the climate hubs do, they serve as like regional hubs for ag and climate impacts all throughout the United States, the continental United States, Alaska, Hawaii, and the Caribbean islands. What the hubs do, we provide technical support, facilitating engagement, discovery, and exchange between ourselves and our various partners and stakeholders in the regions that we cover. We do a lot of outreach and education. We're very closely affiliated with Extension in the 8 states that we cover. We work very closely with those folks, helping to enable climate-informed decisions within Midwestern agriculture. And then assessments and syntheses of climate data and relevant ag climate research to help deliver relevant information, usable information and tools and products to our stakeholders. So just to give you a little bit of history of the state level ag climate assessments. So the need for these documents, previous reports talk about climate change impacts and vulnerabilities on a national or regional basis. So take, for example, the National Climate Assessment. For those of you who are familiar with that document, the 5th National Climate Assessment just came out last year. But the NCA, for example, has agriculture that is discussed as one of the chapters in the NCA, but that's more at a national level. Or there's a chapter that focuses specifically on the Midwest, but that's more of a regional assessment, and ag is only a small part of what's covered in that Midwest chapter. So things are being covered kind of more at a wider geospatial scale. So we wanted to make something that was more localized, more specific to states, localities. As you can imagine, there's going to be a range of issues and impacts that are going to come about from climate change and agriculture that aren't being well captured if we just focus at things at a national or Midwest level. So we wanted to bring things down to more of that local scale. And we wanted to couple the current changes, the observed and projected changes in climate with agriculture in those areas, in those states. So how this project started, this was the idea of Jeff Andreessen and Dennis Toddy. Jeff Andreessen being the Michigan state climatologist, and Dennis Toddy being my supervisor and the director for the USDA Midwest Climate Hub. They formed the original idea and wrote the initial proposal to fund this project. The original intent focused on the climate impacts to agriculture at a state level, and they are highly collaborative with local partners. So a lot of people were going to be involved in these documents, bringing in a lot of different expertise, similar to how the National Climate Assessment comes about. But later it was decided to also include some mitigation and management options, some actual actionable items for farmers and their advisors within these documents. And no means were they meant to provide farm specific recommendations, but just kind of give you things at that 30,000 foot level to kind of start that conversation around climate change impacts and management options on your farm. GLESA, or formerly the Great Lakes RESA, which is one of the NOAA climate change research units that's based at the University of Michigan. They had a small call for proposals to develop information using their data, partnering with their scientists on data analysis. So our point of contact for these documents was BJ Bawley, who was a postdoc at the time working with GLESA, who helped us synthesize both some observed and projected climate data for these documents. The Northern Forest Hub became involved with this as well from more of a forestry side. Todd Ontel, who was formerly a scientist at the Northern Forest Climate Hub and Michigan Tech, was funded through this grant, and he helped to lead the development of the first document, the first state level assessment. Work began on these documents in 2019 into 2020. This was delayed somewhat by issues related to staffing and the COVID pandemic. But now in 2024, this project is well underway and is now being coordinated both by myself and Lori Nowatzki, who is my coworker at the Climate Hub. So the bulletin goals and the format and access for these bulletins. The goal of these documents is to inform farmers and those who advise farmers. So that's our audience, practitioners. These aren't meant to be research documents by any means. They're meant to be actionable. Think of like extension style bulletins. They are to inform farmers and those who advise farmers as to how climate has been and is projected to change at that state level. What will the impacts be to agricultural operations in the state, both those that are currently being observed in the state and those that could occur based on the climate data that we are presenting, and what can be done to help adapt to and mitigate negative impacts. Format and access for these documents, they're roughly about 10 to 15 pages in length, and we try to keep these as plain language as we possibly can. You know, the key here is trying to balance length with complexity. We want to do these issues justice, but we don't want to get too complex with the issue. We want these to be able to be understood by a general audience. And like I mentioned, you know, think of like extension style bulletins. So like something that extension would put out in your state, we want to keep these kind of a similar format to what those would be. And these documents can be viewed or downloaded as a PDF on the Midwest Climate Hub website. If you scan that QR code, that should take you to our Climate Hub's landing page for these documents. You can see an example of what these documents look like, or the cover page. This is the Wisconsin assessment that we released last winter. As you can see, there were a lot of partners who are involved in this document. So who are the contributing partners? We at the Midwest Climate Hub, we're climate experts, weather experts. We wanted to bring in that local expertise on like agricultural issues. So crops experts and soils experts, livestock, natural resources, etc. We wanted to pair our expertise with that local agricultural expertise to create these documents, to provide that state-specific knowledge and guidance into these bulletins. So our co-authors include, as well as the Midwest Climate Hub, our state climatology offices. So each one of the states that we cover has a state climatologist and a state climatology office. So we are close partners with those folks. We wanted to bring them in for their expertise on local climate issues. University researchers, extension educators and specialists, state and federal agencies such as the DNR or NRCS, excuse me, and then others as connections are made. So these weren't like exclusive by any means. A lot of these were partners that we had already, had built relationships with, working relationships, and they helped us connect with other folks within the state. So these were it was just basically, who we knew and who other people knew who became involved with the creation of these documents. And all of these documents go through a peer review process from state experts, from folks other than the co-authors. So we tried to get anywhere from like 2 to 4 reviewers for each one of these documents, similar to how if you were to submit a scientific journal article to a scientific journal, similar to that sort of review process. Just another step to help ensure that we're giving the highest quality of information in these documents. So now I'll just quickly go through some key takeaways from these documents. These are no means exhaustive lists. I just pulled out some of the key trends and the key takeaways, impacts that were noted from these documents based on things either that we contributed or our co-authors contributed. And for more specific impacts, I would highly encourage you to refer to your state-specific assessment for the state that you live in. But I'm just going to go through some of the climate trends that were observed and some of the common themes that came across these documents that we put together. So our observational data went from 1979 to 2021. This particular time period was just when the particular data set that BJ at GLESA, the data set that he synthesized, it went back to 1979. So that's why 1979 was the first year of our trend analysis. So some key takeaways from the observational data: annual temperatures have risen by about 1 to 2 degrees Fahrenheit across the 8-state region since the late 1970s. If you refer to the figure up in the upper right, that's showing at a state-by-state level, both the observed and projected temperature trends by state. The observed are the circles and projected are the triangles, and they're split out both annually and by season. So you can see there's some variability from state to state, season to season, but roughly they're all kind of right in that 1 to 2 degrees Fahrenheit range. With autumn being the season with the highest increase in average temperature since the late 1970s for most states. You see the orange circles being the season of highest increase for most states. And with warmer falls and with warmer springs, what we've been noticing across our states is that we've been seeing a longer growing season, longer frost-free period over the late 20th century into the 21st century. We've been seeing a trend towards longer growing seasons with these increasing temperatures. Precipitation, we've been observing rising annual precipitation in our states, but this is highly variable from state to state. And an increased frequency of heavy precipitation days, or days where we get 2+ inches of rain per year. So more of those high impact events. So projections, mid and late century. So mid-century is kind of around that 2050, 2060 time period. Late century, more like 2080, 2090s. With two different climate scenarios that we used in this case for projected data, intermediate and very high emission scenarios, just different levels of future emissions, which are a big part of what will determine future climate. In these scenarios, we saw further warming, annual and seasonal, dependent on the future climate scenario. So referring again to that chart in the upper right, see those triangles. Further warming is projected in the future. This is a little bit more pronounced with these triangles. This is the RCP 8.5 or high emission scenario. Warming wouldn't be as pronounced with lower emission scenarios, but nonetheless, warming is projected to continue into the future. Less cold extremes and more hot extremes. So as we're seeing increasing temperatures, kind of more of an annual seasonal level, we're seeing more of the hot extremes, less of the cold extremes. Further increases in annual precipitation, with the exception of summer, which for most of our states was projected to be either a season of minimal precipitation change compared to what's been observed, or a little bit drier. And you see this figure down in the lower right. This is projected precipitation changes for Missouri. We have charts like these for each one of the state assessments that show projected precipitation trends into the future. We see this is a case where summers are projected to get drier, with springs being the season of highest increase in precipitation, somewhat in fall and winter as well, with higher projected precipitation changes for the higher emissions scenario. And then moreover, more rain occurring during those high impact events. So more or less, things we have been observing in the past are projected to kind of continue into the future or become more pronounced into the future. And again, you'll please refer to your individual state assessments for those specific trends for your state. So key takeaways for crop and soils impacts. This is where our partners really came into play, bringing in that local crops and soils expertise. So some key impacts that were noted by our partners included issues of soil moisture extremes. This can be soils that are too wet or too dry. So as we're thinking about, times of the year where we have really wet soils, if we're getting more precipitation, especially during like those spring months, we could be seeing some issues with delayed planting. Or if we're trying to get out in the fields during those times when the soils are wet, we might have more issues with compaction. In the fall, issues with delayed harvest, nutrient loss from soil, or erosion. Those all kind of feed back into one another. Those are not exclusive impacts by any means. Those all can be working together on the same soil. And then drought risk in the summer months. If summers are projected to get drier, we could have more issues of not enough soil moisture during that peak growing season. Increased weed, pest, and disease pressure due to changes in temperature and precipitation. As temperatures trend warmer, we could have new pests and diseases moving in. Things that were typically found further to the south may expand their ranges more into our region. Erratic freeze-thaw cycles in winter, which can have negative impacts on soils and soil biology, as well as have impacts to perennial fruit crops, for example, freeze damage, that kind of thing. Fall fertilizer applications, with soils trending warmer in the fall, temperatures trending warmer in the fall, we could be seeing warmer soils later into the fall, and that has impacts for when we can apply fertilizers. Warm nights and reduced corn yield. So nights with elevated temperatures have a negative impact on corn yields. So we could be seeing more of a risk from that. And then increased growing season evapotranspiration during times of the year, during that summertime, if we have ample moisture and temperatures are increasing, evapotranspiration can be expected to increase, or in other words, crop water demand. Some things that were specific to specialty crops. So for some states that we worked with, we did have specialty crop experts that were involved in the documents. And some things that they brought up, like I mentioned already, erratic freeze-thaw cycles in the spring. that can damage fruit crops that are coming out of dormancy, can damage blossoms or fruits that have begun to emerge, potential loss of chilling hours for fruit. So without getting too much into the nuts and bolts of what chilling hours are, basically fruit trees need a certain amount of chilling or temperatures, roughly between 45 and 32 Fahrenheit, to set full fruit in the spring and in the summer. So if temperatures are trending warmer in the winter, we might be seeing a reduction in that, and that can have negative impacts for certain fruit crops. And then warmer winters increasing risk of spring freeze injury by accelerating deacclimation from dormancy. So some adaptation and mitigation options. And by no means are these farm specific. Like I said before, we're kind of flying at a high level with these, but think of these as, excuse me, as kind of as a starting point, as you're starting to think about what can you do on your farm, or for advisors, as you're advising farmers on things that they can do on their farm. Think of this as kind of like a starting point for that conversation, for that critical thinking exercise. So some options that were brought up: increasing soil health by improving soil structure and organic matter content, and that's going to be helped to better infiltrate that precipitation that comes, increase, and then be able to hold on to that water longer through dry periods, and then maintaining a plant available water. This is more for kind of irrigated systems, but water retention basins to capture water during excess moisture to be used during dry periods. So could be used as a source for irrigation water, things like that. Working with your advisor to select crop varieties and species that are well suited for conditions in your area. Thinking about being able to tolerate those higher temperatures, increased water stress, that kind of thing. Consider planting earlier in the season if soil moisture conditions allow. So if things aren't too wet in the spring, as we're getting, taking advantage of that longer growing season, think about, maybe getting out in the fields a little bit earlier. And then consider planting perennials for haying or wildlife pollinator habitat in perennially flood-prone areas. So if there are areas in your field that are consistently a problem with excess moisture, consider looking at some alternative land management strategies for those areas. For livestock, some impacts included high heat, decreasing meat and milk quality and quantity, as well as egg production. Higher animal susceptibility to illness with elevated temperatures, as well as muddy conditions. Certain animal respiratory viruses may have a longer survival duration with lower relative humidity. And the ability for animals to utilize evaporative cooling will be reduced with higher relative humidity. So both lower and higher relative humidity can have some negative impacts on livestock. Some adaptation and mitigation options: utilizing shade structures in pastures or feedlots. These can be man-made structures or things like trees to help livestock stay cooler, reduce their risk for negative impacts of high heat. And then pasture management practices like rotational grazing, diverse forage cover, or installing all-weather surfaces in high traffic areas to reduce the potential for there to be muddy conditions. Helping make those systems more resilient to times where you have too much moisture or not enough moisture. Key takeaways for farm worker health. So kind of thinking back towards some of the specialty crop impacts, a lot of smaller scale ag, we still have actual, human labor folks out there working on these farms. So we wanted to focus some on some impacts and management options for those farmers who do use human labor. Some impacts that were brought up include farm workers who work predominantly outdoors or are particularly vulnerable to heat-related illness. And if there's going to be an increased need for chemical treatments to address increasing pest or weed impacts, and farm workers are out there directly applying those chemicals or working in an environment where those chemicals have been applied, there's an increased risk for human exposure to those particular chemicals. Adaptation mitigation options, exploring options to reduce farm workers' exposure to high temperatures, like providing shade, access to drinking water, alternative working hours, and thinking about, both for high heat and for chemicals, making sure that farm workers have the proper personal safety equipment. So now to provide a little bit of an update on the current bulletin status. As of August 2024, documents that have been published and are available on the Midwest Climate Hub website include those for Wisconsin, Illinois, and Minnesota. And final touch-ups, those that are going through final review and coming soon. This was accurate as of yesterday, but now I'm happy to announce that both Iowa and Indiana have been posted on our website. So now those documents are available for viewing and downloading. And Ohio, Missouri, and Michigan will be coming soon as well. And then ones that are currently, our co-authors are still making contributions on the document. Kentucky's the last one. Kentucky's not technically one of the states that we cover, but we overlap Kentucky with Midwest Regional Climate Center, and we have close partnerships in that state. So we chose to develop a document for them as well. So kind of as a spinoff to the state level documents, where we kind of talk about agriculture and management options kind of at that high 30,000 foot level. We want to kind of get more crop specific. We want to get more, into the nitty gritty of specific crops or groups of crops, management options for those things. We've been focusing a lot of our efforts with this so far on specialty crops. At least here in the Midwest, there aren't a lot of resources for specialty crop growers in terms of resources for managing impacts of climate. So we want to help fill that resource gap by creating these documents. The only one that we've gotten out so far is this one for Christmas trees. We worked with some experts at Michigan State University to put together a bulletin, very similar format to the state level assessments for climate change impacts on Christmas tree production in the Midwest. So the goal of these documents, same goal and audience as the state level assessments, but now we're getting into impacts on specific crops or groups of crops. Format and access, very similar length and level of technicality as the state level assessments. Similar to the state assessments, they can be viewed or downloaded as a PDF on the Midwest Climate Hub website. And in the case of the Michigan State document, they can be linked or co-located on an extension partner's website. And if you scan that QR code, that should take you to our Midwest Climate Hub Specialty Crops website. So what crops and crop groups are we focusing on? We've already created the document for Christmas trees with Michigan State University. And I should say Christmas trees were the first crop that we chose just because of some connections that I had with the Christmas tree industry. Like I said, a lot of these documents and bulletins, who's involved, are based on, existing relationships that we have. So I reached out to the Michigan State folks. They were really interested in putting one of these together. So that's how this one came about. Kind of similar with orchards and vineyards with University of Wisconsin. That one is going through some final review right now, should be available soon. Maple syrup, we're working with the Northern Forest Climate Hub to put together a climate change impacts on maple syrup website, be co-located with Northern Forest Hub. Small scale vegetables is currently in the planning phase. We've talked with a few extension experts about doing a small scale vegetable document. And then others based on interested collaborators. I think where we can find interested collaborators and folks who would be interested in doing something like this, definitely something we could look into further. Outreach plans, both for these crop specific documents and for the state level documents, we're open to ideas. We rely a lot on our state level partners to help direct us on what is going to be useful and what the best ways are to, roll something like this out or disseminate this information. It's something we think about at the hub. How can we package this information in the way it's going to be most useful to those out on the ground. So yeah, please share ideas with us. Some things that we plan to do, promotion of our new websites as they're being developed for the state documents and for specialty crops. An example here is this Michigan State Extension press release that came out earlier this spring when we published the Christmas tree document. And then we also had a webinar and listening session that we did with Michigan State earlier this summer, a Christmas Trees and Climate Roundtable, where we invited all the co-authors on the Christmas tree document together to kind of go over some of the information that was covered in the document, and then give producers a chance to ask some questions about what they saw in the document. So again, we could do something like that again for any one of these things that we are publishing. So with that, here's our contact information for Dennis, our director, Lori, our coordinator, and myself. Yeah, and like I said, we're always open to ideas and talking more about further collaboration and thoughts and feedback that any of you have as you're reading through any one of these materials that we are putting out. So with that, that's all I have, and I think we can open it up to questions, Hans.
All right, that's excellent. So of all the questions we received in the chat during your talk, Lori has answered them all. So
Okay.
I'll cede you off, and if anyone does have any questions, please do enter those in the chat. I do not have the ability for you to unmute your mic because we have a large group here, and I'd hate for anybody to accidentally unmute. As we think about these documents and climate change and future change, Josh, what do you see as the lifetime of one of these documents? And is there any initiative or plan to revisit in a certain number of years to update?
Yeah, that's a great question, Hans. Right now, that's not something that we have discussed. But yeah, I think definitely, as we get, several years down the road and we're thinking about, maybe as, we're getting closer to that time period, like mid-century, as we're getting closer to that time period, or as new, climate modeling or climate projections are coming out, maybe we do want to revisit, as our last observations went back to 2021. At some point we're going to want to update those. So yeah, I think definitely something. I think a lot of the impacts and the management strategy, I think a lot of those will probably be the shelf life of those will probably be a few years for sure. But I think it's more a question of, like, as we're getting new climate data coming out, I think we'll want to update these.
Sure. Okay. Kathy asks in the chat, and I do want to mention that I have opened the poll, so if you get a chance to fill that out, that'd be great. Are there plans to produce a bulletin for natural spaces such as parks or urban spaces?
Not yet, but I would be certainly interested in talking with you more, Kathy, if that's something you'd be interested in working with us on.
And sorry to chime in there, Josh. I just wanted to add too that Kathy, we generally focus in our team on kind of agricultural and managed landscapes, but there is kind of our sister climate hub, the Northern Forest Climate Hub, is based in Houghton, Michigan, and they cover the Midwest and Northeast. And then also, I'll put a link in the chat to their they overlap greatly with the NIACS, National Institute for Applied Climate Science. So I'll put that link in the chat, and they have a lot of assessments around forestry, including urban spaces as well. So that might help too.
While we're waiting on another question, Lori has put a lot of information into the chat, so please check that out. But calling on Lori for a moment, is there anything that you would like to verbally announce to the group?
You're asking me, Hans? Sorry.
Yeah, yes.
Oh, yeah. And I'll just put my camera on. Maybe, are you talking about the job posting specifically?
Such as, yes.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, there are several things in the chat, like links. So we encourage you all to look at those and continue popping questions in there. And I did want to say that we are, as of today, advertising a new position within the Midwest Climate Hub. There's a link in the chat. This person will serve as the liaison between the Climate Hub and NRCS in support of sort of the climate smart ag work that NRCS is building up, and trying to kind of do some science communications and support partnerships and processes around climate adaptation and especially mitigation work with NRCS. And so that's an exciting new role. Generally master's level position, I think was the eligibility. So we invite you to check it out and share it. And we're really excited to get applications for that one. Thanks, Hans.
All right, thank you. Stephanie asks in the chat, is there a timeline for vegetable crop bulletins?
So right now, I would say that's probably something that's going to be coming out sometime later next year. Like I said, we're still kind of in the planning phase on that one, still trying to find what partners are going to be involved in the creation of that document. So, yep, probably sometime in 2025.
All right. Elizabeth asks, are there plans for assessments of the effects of climate change, and I'll abbreviate here, on structures that support production, such as livestock barns, hoop houses, greenhouses, and such?
Yeah, that's a great question. Again, that's not something we have plans for right now, but I think like with any one of these, if we can find some local expertise that could help us put together something like this, like this is not something that we at the Midwest Climate Hub have expertise on, but if we can find someone who would be interested in working with us on something like that, definitely I could see this being something that we could explore.
Okay, want to put out one last call. If you haven't participated in the poll, please do in the next minute, and I'll close that out. Brooke is asking, and I think this was way up in the chat a little bit too, but good to highlight. Are we replicating this type of approach across the other climate hubs as well?
Correct me if I'm wrong on this, Lori, but I don't think any of the other hubs are doing this, are they?
I was just putting in the chat. So there are discussions. So we have talked about this a bit with the Northern Plains, which is adjacent to our region, to the west, and also the Northeast Climate Hub as well. And I also just beginning to chat with my counterpart, the coordinator of the Southeast Climate Hub. It sounds like maybe there's interest there as well. So I think it's possible. It would take quite a bit of, coordination effort and additional data analysis, expanding BJ's data analysis to those other regions. But I don't see any reason we couldn't do it. We just need to kind of pull our forces together to get it done.
All right. We have Moses asking an important question in the chat. How do you measure the impact of something like this?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, this is where I think Moses, who's also part of the Climate Hub, and some of our other social scientists on our team can help me out a little bit with this. Because yeah, we do want to measure the impact of these bulletins, and I think it's something we definitely do need to think about. I mean, we have our traditional ways of surveys and things like that, but if there are more creative ways that we can look into the impacts, yeah. And then I would say, again, relying on our state level partners to just, even if it's just, word of mouth or an email, just like, hey, I brought this up at a presentation, or I use this information in a presentation, it was well received, things like that. So all of the above, I guess, for that.
Okay, well, I think we've answered all of the questions, and I don't see anything new being added at the moment. So there's no reason why we've got to stick through an entire hour. I think you've covered a lot of ground in a pretty quick amount of time. And I sure thank you, Josh, for your presentation today. And although I think Lori had to hop off, I'm going to thank her too for coming in with the background support there in the chat.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. I hope it was a good use of your time.
Have a great day.